3 police cruisers rolled up to my house before my coffee even had time to cool, and my 2 kids were standing barefoot on the porch, watching their father get boxed into his own driveway like some kind of fugitive. Across the street, Denise Whitaker had one hand on her hip, the other still gripping her phone, wearing that polished little smile people wear when they believe they have finally gotten away with being cruel. What she did not know was that the man she had just accused of threatening the neighborhood was not some unstable veteran she could bully with HOA letters and fake concern. I was the deputy operations commander at Redstone Ridge Military Post, and by the time this was over, that phone call would cost her more than she ever imagined. My name is Kayla Mercer, and until that spring, I honestly believed the hardest part of my life was raising 2 kids while my wife was stationed overseas and my father slowly forgot who I was. I had spent 21 years in uniform, learned how to read rooms in places where one wrong word could get people killed, but nothing prepared me for a woman in pearl earrings, a cream-colored SUV, and a clipboard full of neighborhood rules she treated like the Constitution. We lived in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet little subdivision outside Huntsville, Alabama, the kind of place with trimmed lawns, porch flags, barking Labradors, and neighbors who wave with one hand while holding suspicion in the other. My wife, Rachel, was deployed in Poland. My 11-year-old son Owen was trying to act older than he was. My daughter Lily still left sticky notes in my lunch bag that said things like, "Don't forget to smile, Dad." And my father, Arthur, a retired Marine with a Silver Star and advanced dementia, spent most mornings sitting by the kitchen window asking when my mother was coming home, even though she had been gone for 7 years. So peace at home was not a luxury to me. It was oxygen. Then Denise moved in. Her husband had recently lost a defense landscaping contract, a contract everybody in town knew he expected to win because he played golf with the right people. And from the first week, Denise made it clear she blamed families like mine for everything wrong in her world. Military people move too much, she said at the mailbox once, like she was talking about bad weather. Military trucks look aggressive. Military kids bring stress into schools. I remember looking at her and thinking, "Lady, my daughter still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit named Pancake. But sure, tell me more about aggression." The first real incident happened on a Wednesday morning. I had parked my old blue Ram halfway angled in my driveway, so Owen could get his bike out of the garage without scratching the door. Denise marched across the street in white slacks and sunglasses the size of dinner plates, filming my truck like it was evidence at a murder trial. "Caleb," she said, using my first name with the fake sweetness of someone already planning your obituary. "This is a residential community, not a forward operating base." I looked down on my driveway, then back at her. "Denise, it's a pickup truck." She smiled tighter. "It sent a message." That was the first time I realized she did not want compliance. She wanted submission. 10 minutes later, she called the police, claiming I was using military intimidation tactics because I had calmly asked her to stop filming my children. Officer Ruiz showed up looking embarrassed before he even stepped out of the car. He knew me from base outreach events, knew my kids, knew my father, and he knew Denise was performing for the neighborhood. Still, procedure is procedure. So he asked his questions while Denise stood behind him nodding like she had just prevented World War III. That night, after the kids went to bed, I found Dad outside in the dark, standing by the tomato plants with his robe tied crooked and his old Marine Corps cap pulled low. He looked across the street at Denise's perfect porch lights and said, "Clear as a bell, some people don't want order, son. They want control." And that was the first thing he had said in weeks that sounded completely like him. I should have listened harder because Denise was only getting started. Her complaints came in waves after that. 1 HOA notice, then 3, then 7, each one more ridiculous than the last. Unauthorized driveway posture, excessive morning engine noise, improper flag placement, aggressive exterior lighting, even a warning about my father's garden stakes being visually militaristic. I laughed at that one until Lily asked if Grandpa was in trouble, and then I stopped laughing. Because when a grown woman's obsession starts reaching her children, it stops being annoying and starts becoming something else entirely. And by the end of that month, Denise Whitaker made the mistake that changed everything. She walked into a school committee meeting and told a room full of parents that military children should not be given leadership roles because families like ours were temporary, unstable, and emotionally disruptive. That night, Lily came home crying. Owen would not speak at dinner, and I sat in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, a stack of HOA letters, and the calm, ugly realization that Denise had not picked a fight with my driveway. She had picked a fight with my family. The next few weeks felt less like neighborhood drama and more like watching somebody slowly build a cage around your life, one polite smile at a time. Denise never yelled, never cursed, never acted openly hostile in public. And honestly, that was the part that bothered me most. People expect monsters to look angry. Real manipulators usually look organized, calm, helpful. They bake cookies for charity drives while quietly poisoning the room. Every morning at exactly 6:45, she would stand at her front window with a coffee mug and that damn phone in her hand, watching the street like a prison guard counting inmates. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe stress was getting to me. Maybe I was carrying too much between Rachel being overseas, Dad's dementia getting worse, and trying to keep the kids stable. But then the HOA letters started arriving faster than junk mail. One claimed my truck's diesel engine created psychological disturbance during quiet hours. Another said my American flag was oversized and carried implied aggression toward neighboring residents. I actually stared at that sentence for a full minute, wondering if I had accidentally moved into a parody of suburban America. Then came the one about Owen practicing basketball in the driveway after 7 p.m. because the bouncing noise created hostile environmental tension. That one made my son stop touching the basketball entirely. And that right there, that was when something shifted inside me. See, I can handle attacks on me. Most military families can. We get trained to absorb pressure, compartmentalize stress, keep moving. But watching your 11-year-old quietly slide his basketball under the bed because he thinks existing too loudly might upset the neighborhood, that does something ugly to a man. A few days later, Lily came home from school unusually quiet. She barely touched dinner. Halfway through the meal, she finally asked, "Daddy, are we bad neighbors?" The room went dead silent. Even Dad looked up from his plate. I asked her why she would think that, and she said Mrs. Whitaker told some parents at school that military families bring violence into communities because soldiers are trained for conflict instead of kindness. I felt my jaw tighten so hard it hurt behind my ears. Owen stared down at his mashed potatoes like he was trying not to cry. Dad suddenly slammed his fork down harder than I had seen him move in months. "That woman doesn't know a damn thing about service," he snapped. His voice was sharp, marine sharp, cutting through the room, so suddenly Lily nearly jumped. Then just as fast, the clarity faded from his face again, and he looked around confused, asking where my mother was. And that broke me worse than anything Denise had done so far. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the back porch listening to cicadas buzz through the Alabama heat while the neighborhood settled into silence. Across the street, Denise's porch light glowed like a lighthouse for self-righteousness. I kept thinking about what Dad said. Some people don't want order, they want control. 21 years in military intelligence teaches you to recognize patterns. Not emotion, patterns. And suddenly I started seeing them everywhere. Every complaint Denise filed happened within 48 hours of some interaction with a military family. Every school issue somehow targeted kids whose parents served. Every HOA violation involved veterans, while civilians with identical issues got warnings or nothing at all. So I started documenting, quietly, methodically, the same way I had built intelligence reports overseas. Dates, times, photos, HOA records, public meeting minutes, neighborhood emails. I created folders on my laptop after the kids went to bed, while drinking coffee that tasted like burnt dirt because sleep had stopped matching. Wi-Fi made my stomach turn. Military families made up maybe 20% of Willow Creek estates, but accounted for nearly 70% of all HOA citations over the last year. One retired Army nurse got fined because her husband's wheelchair ramp altered aesthetic consistency. A Navy family down the street received 4 warnings over chalk drawings their autistic son made on the sidewalk, while Denise's grandkids literally painted Halloween ghosts across their driveway every October with no issue at all. It was targeted, deliberate, surgical, and Denise was always connected somehow. Then things escalated. Of course they did, because people like Denise don't stop once they realize they have influence. They get addicted to it. One Thursday evening, I attended a school board meeting after hearing rumors military kids might be excluded from advanced placement leadership programs. I walked into that cafeteria and immediately saw Denise standing near the projector wearing a navy blazer and holding printed packets like she was about to announce election results. She smiled when she saw me. Not nervous, not surprised, smug, like she had been waiting for me to show up. The presentation started normally enough, declining test scores, extracurricular funding, volunteer shortages. Then Denise took the microphone. "We need to discuss stability in our schools," she said gently. "Consistency matters for children. Long-term community investment matters. Some families unfortunately rotate in and out so frequently they unintentionally disrupt leadership continuity." There it was. Not direct enough to get called discrimination. Just clean enough to sound reasonable to people not paying attention. She clicked to the next slide. Charts appeared showing military relocation statistics, deployment rates, counseling needs among military children. Carefully selected information twisted into fear. Then she said the sentence that made the entire room go cold for me. "We appreciate service, of course, but perhaps leadership positions should prioritize families with permanent roots in the community." I heard someone behind me whisper "wow" under their breath. Owen was sitting beside me. I felt him shrink into his chair. Denise looked directly at him while saying it. Directly at my son. I stood up slowly, and every instinct military training ever built into me was screaming to stay calm. Because people like Denise survive by provoking reactions. They paint themselves as victims the second someone pushes back emotionally. So I smiled instead. Small. Controlled. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "my family has moved 11 times serving this country. My wife missed anniversaries overseas. My father buried friends in Vietnam. My children learn how to say goodbye before most adults do. So if you want to discuss commitment to community, maybe start with the people willing to die for it." You could have heard a pin drop in that cafeteria. Denise's smile flickered for half a second. Just enough. But then she recovered. "Colonel Mercer, nobody is questioning your service. This conversation is about emotional stability for students." And there was again that little implication. Dangerous veteran. Unstable soldier. Violent military culture. She never said it directly because she was smarter than that. But she wanted everyone else to think it. The meeting ended awkwardly after that. Parents whispered in corners while Denise kept shaking hands like a politician after a debate. But as I walked to my truck, another parent quietly caught up to me in the parking lot. Her husband was Air Force. She looked nervous even speaking to me. "You should know something," she said softly. "Denise has a private group chat with several HOA members and school volunteers. They track military families." I frowned. "Track how?" She swallowed hard. "Complaints, schedules, deployment rumors, which families might move soon, stuff like that." My blood went cold. She handed me screenshots from her phone before hurrying away like she was afraid of being seen. I sat in my truck, reading those messages under the parking lot lights, while thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. There were names, notes, comments about military spouses, discussions about how to pressure certain families into leaving the neighborhood voluntarily. One message from Denise read, "If enough pressure builds, most military families relocate before formal legal action becomes necessary. I leaned back in my seat and stared through the windshield for a long time while rain finally started tapping against the glass. Because up until that moment, part of me still believed Denise was just a bitter HOA bully with too much time on her hands. But this was coordinated, planned, and suddenly every instinct I'd spent decades developing overseas started whispering the same thing in the back of my mind. Denise Whitaker wasn't just trying to control a neighborhood. She was running an operation. And the worst part was, I had a feeling she was only getting started. The funny thing about people who build their entire identity around controlling others is they eventually start believing they're untouchable. Denise Whitaker had spent so many months manipulating neighbors, weaponizing school committees, hiding behind HOA bylaws and fake concern for the community. She genuinely thought nobody would ever push back hard enough to expose her. And honestly, she almost got away with it. 2 days after I found those screenshots, things escalated faster than I expected. I came home from base around sunset and found 2 police cruisers parked outside my house again. Lights flashing across the windows while half the neighborhood watched from their porches pretending not to stare. Owen opened the front door before I even reached the steps. "Dad, they said you threatened Mrs. Whitaker." His voice cracked when he said it. Officer Delaney met me halfway up the driveway, looking exhausted. "Caleb, I am sorry. Man, we got a report saying you followed Denise home from the school board meeting and verbally intimidated her." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I was suddenly too tired to be angry anymore. That woman had figured out the system. Every accusation forced a response. Every response created suspicion, and suspicion was enough to poison a community. But this time she got careless, because this time I had proof. My truck had a full dash camera system Rachel convinced me to install before her deployment, mostly because she worried about my father wandering outside at night while I was gone. It captured everything. Me leaving the school meeting, me stopping for gas, me sitting in a Whataburger parking lot eating cold fries alone for 30 minutes before driving home. Denise's entire accusation collapsed in under 4 minutes of footage. Officer Delaney watched the video inside my kitchen while Lily colored quietly at the table pretending not to listen. When the footage ended, he rubbed both hands down his face and muttered, "Jesus Christ." Dad looked over from his recliner and said, "That woman lies like a politician in wartime." Weirdly enough, that was one of the clearest things he had said in months. The next morning I made some calls. Not military calls. Dad calls. Husband calls. Neighbor calls. Quiet conversations with other military families in surrounding neighborhoods. And once people realized somebody was finally willing to speak openly, the stories came pouring out. One Marine family had been anonymously reported to child services after the father returned from deployment with PTSD counseling appointments. An Army widow was pressured out of an HOA committee because neighbors claimed she brought emotional heaviness into community events. A Coast Guard family found fake complaints filed against their teenage son claiming gang activity because he wore combat boots to school. Every story somehow circled back to Denise or someone connected to her private little social network. And suddenly I understood something important. Denise didn't hate military families because of noise complaints or trucks or property values. She hated us because military families represented something she could not control. Discipline, sacrifice, loyalty, resilience. People who survive deployments tend not to bend easily for suburban tyrants with clipboards. That realization changed everything for me, because now this was no longer about defending my driveway. It was about ending the pattern. So I stopped reacting emotionally and started building a case. Quietly, patiently. I forwarded screenshots, HOA records, false reports, and school communications to base legal services. Then I contacted a civilian attorney who specialized in housing discrimination. Then another parent from a school district handed over audio recordings from Denise's private volunteer meetings. And that was the moment the entire thing detonated. Because Denise stopped pretending in private. On those recordings, she openly discussed making military families uncomfortable enough to leave the district voluntarily. She referred to deployed parents as unstable influences. She joked that veterans expected special treatment because they wore camouflage. At one point, she literally said, "Communities work better when transient families stop trying to take leadership positions from real residents." Real residents. I listened to that sentence 3 times in silence. Then I forwarded every file to legal counsel. The fallout came fast. Faster than Denise ever imagined. The school district launched an internal investigation after multiple parents came forward publicly. The HOA board fractured almost overnight once evidence surfaced showing selective enforcement targeting veterans and military spouses. Local news picked up the story after one military wife posted screenshots online beside a photo of her husband's folded burial flag. Suddenly, the same neighbors who once smiled politely at Denise in the grocery store were avoiding eye contact with her entirely. Then came the final scene, the one I still think about sometimes late at night when the house is quiet. It happened during an emergency HOA meeting packed wall to wall with residents. Denise stood near the front, clutching her binder against her chest, while lawyers spoke in calm, measured voices about discrimination exposure and civil liability. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, spiritually, like somebody had finally pulled the batteries out of the machine she built herself into. At one point, she looked directly at me from across the room and said, "You turned everyone against me." I remember standing there with my hands in my pockets, exhausted beyond anger, and answering her honestly, "No, Denise, you did that yourself." Silence swallowed the room after that. A week later, she resigned from the HOA board. 2 others stepped down with her. The school district issued formal policy changes protecting military families from discriminatory exclusion in leadership programs and community activities. And slowly, painfully slowly, life became quiet again. Owen started playing basketball outside after dinner. Lily smiled more. Dad spent mornings back in the garden talking to tomatoes like old friend from another lifetime. Rachel finally came home 6 weeks later and stood in the kitchen reading through the stack of HOA letters and legal paperwork while shaking her head in disbelief. Then she looked at me and asked the question I still don't fully know how to answer. Was it worth it? And honestly, I don't know. Because here's the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about in stories like this. Denise was wrong, deeply wrong, cruel even, but she didn't become that way overnight. Somewhere along the line, fear curdled into resentment, resentment turned into control, and control turned into obsession. Communities do that sometimes now. People stop seeing neighbors and start seeing categories. Military, civilian, outsider, insider, red state, blue state, homeowner, renter. Everybody slowly carving each other into enemy groups until somebody finally snaps over something stupid like a pickup truck in a driveway. The scary part is how easy it happens. So yeah, Denise lost her position, lost friends, probably lost the image she spent years building for herself. But sometimes I still wonder if exposing her fixed the problem or just exposed how broken people already were underneath the surface. And maybe that's the real reason this whole thing still bothers me. Anyway, if you made it this far, I want to hear your thoughts. Was Denise just a power-hungry HOA Karen who got exactly what she deserved? Or do you think people like her are symptoms of something bigger happening in communities across America right now? And be honest, if somebody started targeting your family the way she targeted mine, how far would you go to fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because trust me, after this happened, I realized everybody has a neighborhood story they've been waiting to tell. And if you want more real HOA nightmare stories where entitled people finally meet consequences hit subscribe and stick around, because the next one might honestly be even crazier than this.